That was what we knew pretty much when we came together in May of 2019. And maybe we all see a couple of familiar faces here about our gathering in May of 2019 in Monaghan, which was a wonderful, wonderful time. And I hope to see you again soon. But as we gained information, we talked about in Ireland how we had this genetic map that we were starting to build. And at the time, we only had 6 people. And we said, we think we can create a genetic family tree of the entire Trainer clan. And by using genetics and these genetic markers, we can actually allow people to know who they're related to. So if your family left Ireland 100, 200, 300 years ago, we might be able to use this genetic tool to say which family you originally belonged to and to help to reconnect
John,
trainers around the world. Yes.
just a quick one. Can you expand your presentation? You're showing the preview and the preview. So
I'm sorry. Can you bear with me for one moment?
that's all right. I mean,
I'm showing the wrong slide.
We can see it. It's just shrinking.
I'm going to stop share for a moment.
Okay.
Hi. And then I'm going to share again. Bear with me. I'm not quite comfortable with this. And slideshow. Bear with me for one moment. Now I'm going to share a screen again. Seamus, sharing screen is disabled. Could you do me a favor and re-allow?
Share screen. Bloody systems. I think, do I have to make you the host again?
Okay. Not yet. Still disabled.
Yeah. Sorry, I'm trying to allow participants. I think I should be able to allow you just to share the screen.
I'll talk a little bit while we're waiting. Oh, there we go. Okay, bear with me. You're going to have to tell me if you see this in full screen. Bear with me for a moment.
Yes, we do. We do see it in full screen. That's
How's
right.
that?
Yeah.
Okay, I hope this is better. So we only had 6 people, and we hoped that we would be able to actually use this genetic information to reacquaint people with who they were connected to and what the family tree of the entire Trainer family looked like. And over the course of the next 18 months, new people joined the project. We got new tests taken, and the tree began to expand. And we learned new things with every iteration through the tree. First of all, we learned that there were 2 separate branches of trainers. One called the O'Neill trainers, which is on the far right side of the page, and the other one called the Hymany trainers, which are in the kind of the middle of the page and tends to be the bigger group. And this is the chart as it stands today. We've learned over the course that there are 6 branches of the Hymany trainers, and we gave them names called the Aid, the Brendan, Cormac, Dermot, Iana, and Finn. And those people didn't really have those names, but we made them for convenience so you could talk about which branch you belong to. And then on the far right side, the O'Neill trainers. And by learning that, we also were able to start to say which branches of the Irish families were connected to each other. So for example, the Becken and the Brynies and the Rose and the Figaharleys and the Miles are all members of the Aid branch on the far left side, whereas the Brendan branch contains trainers who may have been in Antrim or Tyrone or in Carrick. So we're beginning to learn where each of the branches of trainers fit in and which branch of the Trainer family they belong to. We also are learning genetic markers, and what that means is that a trainer who joins the project will be able to know, for example, that he might be closely related to Noel Miller or to Jeannie Morris or to Seamus Miles, and which branch of the Trainer family he fits into. And if you're interested more in getting into how this has developed over time, you're welcome to go to the Trainer website, trainer.org/trainer-DNA. And a copy of this presentation will be made available on the Trainer page later on. The other thing that we learned was that we actually came from a sudden branching within the Hymenid trainers, a sudden branching of the Trainer family. And it all happened very suddenly. Well, how do we know that we all came from 6 brothers? Well, in truth, it's probably not brothers. It's probably cousins, because it takes a little time for DNA to mutate and to be different. But what we see is that this doesn't branch like a series of forks, where you fork and then you fork and then you fork again. It suddenly branches within the Hymenid trainers into 6 branches all at the same time. And how do we know that it happened at the same time within a couple generations? Well, because all of the DNA markers that are unique about the AIDS don't show up in the Brendans, and the markers of the Brendans don't show up in the Cormics or in the Dermids or the Iana. And so instead of getting a kind of a forked tree pattern where people split off in a series of splits, this happens suddenly and spontaneously. And this is a trait that actually is seen before, and it's called the founder effect, where perhaps a wealthy man or a successful man has a large family that spreads out and is successful. And it's something that you see a lot in genetics in families that are successful, that they suddenly spread out and have a big family and start having a lot of descendants in different branches. And sure enough, this is exactly what we see going on with the trainers and the Hymenid trainers. But you also see that the branch of the people that we call the O'Neill trainers branched off differently. They branched off very early. And I'll talk to this a little bit more, but probably as long as 2000 BC. And we'll talk more to that point. So are we all from the same place? And the answer is, we certainly are, because we know, for example, that even though we spread out from Ireland through the rest of the world, that our original ancestors came from the Pontic steppes of Russia 5,000 or 6,000 years ago. But more recently than that, our findings so far, by linking the DNA of the families and the DNA of current people, that the Hymenid branch of the trainers have 6 branches that we saw on the other chart. And out of those 6 branches, 4 of them overlap in a very small area of Ireland, which corresponds to Errigal True in Northern Ireland, or perhaps the area not too far from Emivale, or the section of Ireland that's called True, Oriel. Seamus?
I was just going to say, Emivale to Offnacloy. But yeah, True. Most of the Irish people will know where True is. But yeah, go on.
And we see that some of those branches are in more than one place. So within the Ianas, we have branches that extend. So a small cluster of Ianas out in the west in Connaught. The Cormics, the earliest that we have of the Cormics is that they were down in the Wicklow Mountains. And we think that they went down there probably in the 1600s or maybe a little later. Similarly with the Finns, we think that that they probably migrated down there within recent recorded history. The O'Neills is a question mark to us. We know that the O'Neills, who we have tested so far, all live on the east end of the old kingdom of Oriel at the area called Carlingford Loch. And that's where the current ancestry leads to. Now, do we know that they were always there, or do they migrate there at some point? We're not exactly sure, but we're beginning to think that the home of the Hymenid trainers is this area of Northern Ireland called True, And the home of the O'Neill trainers within recent history is Carlingford Loch and the area nearby. Now, how do we know that it dates back to a particular time, for example, 1300 AD? How do we know that it goes back that far in history? Well, the answer is it's an estimate. And I'll tell you how we got the estimate. For example, if I look at the time between the time we all had a common ancestor and all of our DNA was the same with one person, and today, and I look at my branch, which is the Miles branch of Seamus Miles and myself, we've seen about 12 unique genetic mutations compared to other people that are different for us. But different branches have seen a different number of genetic mutations. The people who are in the Yankee John and Peter branch have seen about 8 mutations. Some groups have seen as few as 3 mutations that are unique and different to them. So what you're seeing here is that genetic mutations don't happen at the same rate for every family. Some happen a little bit more quickly and some happen a little bit more slowly. Why would that be? Well, it could be related to a lot of things. It could be related to the fact that some fathers had their children when they were older, and so their DNA had actually had some mutations. It could be that a particular branch of the family had more generations. They had their children younger at age 20, and they had lots and lots and lots of generations in between, and more time for mutations to happen. So there's a lot of reasons it could happen. For all we know, it could even happen, for example, if your family lived in an area that had a little bit more native radioactivity, like in Connaught, which has a higher level of radon in the soil in Connaught compared to in Monaghan. So it could just be a lot of different things, diet and ancestry and other factors. But by taking the average of these numbers across all of the different trainer families, we come to about 8 mutations per branch on average, some more, some less. And if we take those 8 mutations and multiply it by 80 years, which is a geneticist guess for mutation rate, it takes us back to the 1300s. Now, if I use the 3 of the Carrick trainers, or if I used the 12 of the Miles trainers, I would get a different answer. So the best that we can say is that we're taking an average to try to estimate this common ancestor. And the more tests we have, the more we know. But that's how we got originally to the year 1300 as a common ancestor. Now we've found some, please go ahead.
And that's just an estimate at the moment. We do need more tests, don't we?
Mm-hmm. And the more tests we do, the more we learn. And if we gain more information, also historical information, we may be able to add a historical context to this. And we're working that side of the equation as well. We're trying to learn more about historical people. And we're actually making a little bit of progress. There's a document that we found this past year, and which we had translated by the Irish Studies Department at Trinity. And the Gaelic for it, which I'm going to massacre, and I apologize in advance, is Genelic Quan Traynor O'Connor. So the genealogy of the Traynor clan, Traynor O'Connor clan. Well, I never knew that I was an O'Connor trainer. I don't know where that came from. But the interesting thing about this is that it sources Trainer ancestry to a group of people who we know that we are in fact descended from or related to, which is the Kellys of Connaught, and specifically in this document, to Tigmore O'Kelly, the first of his name, the first Kelly, and the 36th king of the Hymeny in Ireland. So this may actually lend some substance to the fact that we might actually be able to trace our ancestry back into the Kelly clan. But we don't know for sure that this is accurate yet. A lot of medieval documents tend to be creative sometimes. What's interesting, unique about this is that we know genetically that we are related to the Hymenes, to many more, and to the people who became the Kellys of Connaught. And this document actually says we are. So it's interesting that we see convergence between a historical document and what we know to be true based on genetics. So there may actually turn out to be something interesting here that we're going to have to research more. Part of the interesting piece of this is that these names are actually true historical characters. They're documented in other books of Ireland, and specifically in the uh, annals of, and I'm going to pronounce this wrong, Seamus Tirnach.
No, I think the Annals of Ulster is that the English term?
Oh, but this one is Tighernagh. Tirnach. I don't know. But it was a document that actually talked a little bit more about the west of Ireland. So what, not this particular handwritten document, but the one when we look at these names are historically recorded. So
Right.
we may have an angle on a connection between the Hymeny Trainers and the historical Hymeny kings of Connaught. Now, with the O'Neills, we're still working on where that connection is. What we do know is that the genetic marker called M222 that is associated with the O'Neill trainers is also the genetic marker that people called the genetic marker for Neil Neuglage, the Neil of the Nine Hostages. And so we believe that that branch of the trainers is related to the O'Neills of Northern Ireland and Ulster. And so actually two different branches, the O'Neills and the Hymeny, coming together with the same name. Some interesting sources about that time of history. I got some of this from Noel Thrush and a little bit from the medieval Trainer genealogy and a little bit from the Annals of Ireland, including the Annals of Ulster. 1327, a plague of smallpox prevailed throughout Ireland. In 1328, there was a crop failure due to prevailing weather. In 1329, there was a plague of general disease throughout Ireland. So these were not good times to be alive. And we don't know whether or not Black Plague, the Black Death, also affected us. It didn't get recorded very much in Middle Ireland, and it didn't reach until 1350, but that was also an event of the 14th century. So there was a lot going on, and this could be the time when the Traynor family of the Hymenes and the Traynor family of the O'Neills became the families that they are now. He also records in our history, this is Peter Livingston, about the migration of the families in the RD area as well. So we're very anxious to try to see if we can get in touch with some of the RD trainers and learn a little bit more about our connection to each other and how we can learn more about that. One more interesting note, 1505, the year 1505, in the Annals of Ulster, somebody wrote, William McCreanor Jr. died this year of a disease of his leg. Well, who was this guy who was so important that his disease of his leg and his death would be recorded in the Annals of Ulster? Obviously, in the year 1505, William McCreanor, and probably his father or grandfather, since he's junior, was a pretty important guy, so that he was noted and his death was made note of in the year 1505. So we're learning that at this time, from the 14th century to the 16th century, the trainers are being mentioned within the Annals of Ulster and described, and their the events of their lives were actually being recorded. So we're getting a little bit of a better handle on who those people were. Now, before I get off that topic and into the next question, which is about the different types of tests, does anybody have any questions that you want to ask about the historical trainers?
We haven't got any here at the moment, John.
Okay, we'll
we've got,
check back every so often, and if you want to inject a question,
yeah,
we'll
chat.
loop back every so often. Now, one of the questions that we've been getting from time to time is, about different tests. Which tests do we recommend? Are there tests that are cheaper? And why did we pick the one that seems to be the most expensive? And the answer is there are lots of different tests, but like tools in a toolkit, the different tests do different things. And I prepared this chart so that you could see a little bit more about the different type of tests you can take. For example, there's a company called 23andMe that does a test that describes some information about maybe who your cousins might be by using that thing that we call autosomal DNA, which is DNA of all your ancestors. And it also provides you with the opportunity to talk about what kind of genetic risks you might have. Pardon me. How do they do that? Well, they do it by genetic studies and also by trying to identify conditions that are prevalent in particular groups of people. And one of the things that that service does is it tells you, oh, you know, you have a gene that might make you more likely to get a particular type of disease, maybe later in life. Oh yeah, I took that test and I was very interested in the results, but it made me a little nervous to tell you the truth. But it's a wonderful test and something very interesting to experiment with. Um, Ancestry DNA, which is a different company, provides an autosomal test, again, from all of your ancestors, your mother's ancestors and your father's ancestors. And that's a good test to identify who are your recent cousins, who are you related to, probably within the range of fourth to fifth cousins. It's not very good at describing people who might be eighth cousins because DNA breaks up and gets recombined every generation. And so over time, it's harder to say you're a cousin. But this is a great test to find out who you might be related to on any side. You know, your mother's father's father, your father's mother's mother. And by looking at that kind of data, you can say, oh, well, here's a cousin on my father's side, here's a cousin on my mother's side. That's also a pretty inexpensive test, and it's a good test to find recent relationships. Finally, there's this test that we take from family tree DNA, and they provide autosomal tests, they provide mitochondrial tests, and they also provide these Y-DNA tests. And if you look down here, you see that there are actually several different Y-DNA tests, Y37, Y111, and Y700. We see that Y700 is actually almost the most expensive of the four. And why did we choose that one? Well, the best way to describe it is to say, what could I learn out of it? From a Y37 test, you could probably say, well, okay, I'm definitely Irish and I'm probably more from Ulster and probably I'm not from Connaught, probably not from Louth. So I know kind of where I'm from, but it doesn't tell you much more than that. The Y111 test is a little bit more precise. It might be able to tell you, for example, whether you're a Hymene or an O'Neill, but it wouldn't be very good to tell you something more than that. The big Y700 test is the one that actually says, where do I fit precisely in this tree? Not just in the O'Neill or Hymene tree, but in the Miles branch or the Miller branch or the Thrush branch. So we can actually use that to say, you belong right here in this part of the tree. And that's what the big Y700 does. There's another more expensive option if you want to play with the data yourself. And typically we don't need that. But that's why we actually choose. And so why do we recommend it? Well, we need Y-DNA tests to check patrilineal ancestry, our father's father. Y37 and Y111 are cheaper, but they only tell us part of the story. It's analogous to getting the name of the street that you're trying to find, but not actually knowing the number of the house. It may get you to the right neighborhood, but it doesn't tell you precisely where you want to go. It may tell you, for example, that you're a Hymene or O'Neill, but it won't tell you which branch. It's actually big Y that tells us with a good deal of precision exactly where you fit in the tree, bough, limb, branch, twig, and leaf. So we can say your family is exactly right here. Another question we got is, what can DNA tell us about our ancestors and about us, and what can't it tell us? Well, Genetic science still has a long way to go, but it certainly can't tell us everything. It can tell us a lot of things. It can tell us, for example, who we're related to on any side of our family if we do an autosomal test, probably out to about the fourth or fifth cousin range. It can tell us whether we have a predisposition toward a certain medical condition. Not a guarantee, because it's always a probability, but that you might be more subject to a particular condition with a test with 23andMe. It can tell us about the ancient history of our mother's 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 mother by using mitochondrial DNA, which is a fascinating area of study and allows us, for example, to know even what parts of Europe or what parts of the world our mother's ancestry came from. And it can tell us about our father's ancient DNA, as we've been talking about here today. It can even tell us, for example, which parts of Ireland our family probably came from. Now, this is a result of my test with Ancestry DNA. And all these little circles that you see on this map describe uh, places where pieces of my DNA have been found in other people. And the fascinating thing to me about this chart is that I can actually identify branches of my family and where they came from because I know a little bit about my family history. My father's mother was actually old American colonial British. And I can see from this map that actually she was a lot of Scottish and Welsh more than anything else. But I can also see that parts of my trainer, including of my family, including the trainers, or including my Grogan families, or including my Maguires and my Kennellans, I can actually know myself what part of Ireland each of those branches came from. Because I know, for example, that my Kennellans were from near Carrick on Shannon, and I know that my Maguires were from uh, um, the Shannon River Valley. So I can pick out from this map where they came from. And it's actually a kind of an interesting science that they can say, if your DNA tells me that part of your ancestry came from this particular part of Connaught or this particular part of Ulster. What it can't tell you, it's not going to tell you whether you're above average or you're good looking or anything that's maybe more subjective than that. It can't even really tell your exact eye color or hair color or your height, how tall you are, because actually many different DNA genes combine to determine that. You may be likely to have blue eyes, but it can't guarantee by looking at your DNA that you have blue eyes.
That's really interesting, John. That bit, yeah, because everybody says that your DNA tells you exactly where you are, but you can't even tell your eye color or guarantee it, and your hair color changes. So
Exactly. And this is an important thing about DNA is that there are actually lots of different genes that control what happens to us and what we look like and who we are. And those genes interact together. So it's not what's one gene that controls eye color or hair color. It's actually how different genes that you have interact.
right,
Another question we received is, how can we see how closely we are related between the O'Neill trainers and the Hymeny trainers? And we do know that answer. While Hymeny trainers and O'Neill trainers may have married, even in the recent past, a Hymeny man may have married a O'Neill trainer woman or vice versa. The person who was a common male ancestor all the way back in both lines, father's 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 father, from whom both male lines are descended, probably lived a very long time ago, probably around 4,000 years. And the families that we call now the O'Neill trainers and the Hymeny trainers probably divided around that time that we came to Ireland and spread out. We're still learning more about the O'Neill trainers. We have fewer test results from the O'Neills, suggesting that it may be a smaller family. But we are also trying to recruit more trainers from for example, out in the area of Carlingford and even trainers from other areas to try to learn more about where they may be and where they may have come from and what their family history tells them. But those O'Neills that we have so far, we've tested back, as I said before, to homeland surrounding Carlingford Lough, so the area around Rostravor and Carlingford Mountain on the opposite sides of the lough. What can we tell about their sisters? Do you need male DNA to do the work, or can you find something out from female DNA? Well, female DNA is great, and we can do wonderful things to explore, but it won't necessarily answer this particular question about male ancestry, which is in Western society the way that names go, like trainers. Now, bear in mind, only 1 out of 32 of your great great grandparents was a trainer, probably. Well, except in Monaghan, you may have more than one. But uh, generally, your family, as you go back, has a lot of different names. It just so happens that we're focused on Trainer because that's our last name. Women can trace their ancestry in several ways. First of all, it's possible to use those autosomal tests to identify close relatives. So, for example, the one I like is actually Ancestry DNA for doing autosomal research because they have a very big database with lots and lots of people in it. And you can find cousins that you had no idea that you might be related to, and they may know something about your family history that you don't know. So it's a wonderful opportunity to reach out. Um, and if you find a male trainer who's a cousin, if you're a woman and you don't have Y-DNA, uh, if you have a male trainer that you find as a cousin, you can ask that cousin to participate with you and to trace Y-DNA and figure out which family he belonged to. Also, women can do a great thing, which is tracing their mother's long history by looking at mitochondrial DNA tests, which we inherit from our mother's line. And I've actually done that research too. My mother was a Grogan, and her mother was a McGuire, and her mother was a Kelly, and her mother was a Cullen. And I don't know beyond that because we change names every generation. But the mitochondrial DNA type that I have is called K1C2, and it's not rare in Ireland. It's actually pretty common, but it's a female line that we know followed that same migration path from the steppes of Russia in the Indo-European migration. So I know that my mother's people are descended from women who walked with the men who came in that migration from the steppes of Russia into Europe and then ultimately into Ireland about the year 2000. But every one of us may have a different mitochondrial DNA path. It may be possible that your mother came from France, your mother's people came from France 3 generations ago. And so you can do a mitochondrial DNA test that tells you a lot about where your mother's people might have come from, which is a great test. One person said, our report says that we're 95% British Irish, 3% Viking, and 2% Southeastern European. How do they know that we're 3% Viking instead of, 50% Viking? And where in Southeast Europe did I come from? Can that be more specific? And how do they know Southeast Europe versus Viking? How do they learn that? Well, when you do those autosomal DNA tests, like the one that I showed you the map of earlier, uh, small sections of your DNA can be identified that are actually dominant in certain areas of the world. So, for example, in my test, I had a chunk of DNA that's very common in Wales. Another person might have DNA that's very common in the Nordic populations in Denmark and in Sweden and Norway. And that DNA is very commonly associated with Vikings and the descendants of Vikings. Similarly, another small portion of your DNA might be frequently seen in Southeastern Europe, perhaps in Croatia, so and nowhere else, pardon me, and not in Ireland. So that tells us, oh, well, that chunk of your DNA seems to be very common in people who live in Bulgaria. And that's how they actually say, you just have this one small spot of DNA, but it appears to be DNA that came from people in Southeastern Europe. Um, Autosomal testing can even tell you, as I showed you a little bit more earlier, about regional populations, what part of Ireland you came from, or what part of Wales or Scotland you came from, and where they were born. up to maybe 150 years ago. And the reason they can do that is because, as we know, 150 years ago, populations weren't very mobile. A lot of people stayed where they were born and stayed where they were raised. And so recent research has allowed us to say, this is a DNA type that's very common in this particular part of Ireland, Northern Ireland, or in Connaught. So that's how that map that I showed you earlier worked. A question we also get is, if I take a DNA test like this Y-DNA test, how far does it cover laterally, across my cousins? Do we all have to take a test? Or if my test shows that I'm a Miles Trainer, is that good for my cousins? Well, it's a little different depending on what kind of test you take. But if you're descended within recent history from the same male trainer, pardon me, one of my dogs is making a ruckus out on the balcony. Your DNA test will show almost no difference. So for example, Seamus Miles and I are probably fifth cousins based on our current research, but he and I wind up immediately adjacent in the Miles leaf of the A branch of the Hymany tree. So your fifth cousin and you will probably have almost identical research results that say you're almost identical. And what that means is you and your third cousin or fourth cousin can chip in together and take the test, and you're going to get the same results for Y-DNA because it doesn't change that much over time. However, for that autosomal testing, where you're testing all your DNA from all of your grandparents, even two siblings can show very different mixes of their four grandparents. And for example, the question of how do I know that I came from Southeastern Europe? Two siblings can show different results. It'll probably show the same general results, but in very different proportions. And that's because two brothers or two sisters have a different mix of their grandparents' genes and ancestry. And so for autosomal testing, the more of your relatives who test, the more you might learn about your family. And the good news is these autosomal tests are actually cheaper by a long shot, like Ancestry DNA, which is something like $79 to $89, depending on the test, and a lot more affordable. So you and your sister might actually find slightly different results about she's got more of her Viking ancestry and you've got more of her Irish ancestry. Now, go ahead, Seamus.
No. I was just saying that again. That's surprising where siblings can be so different.
And in my family, we have I have four brothers and four sisters, so we've got a good sample, and we're all different. Some of us are darker haired and darker eyed. Some of us are blonde haired and blue eyed. And so it's fascinating to see how in one family you can wind up with a lot of different traits. I mentioned before I was going to tell you a story, and I'd like to tell you the story not because I want to talk about me, but because I want to illustrate a point about genealogical research and how we can use it to answer questions. The three primary tools of genealogical research, generally speaking, are family histories, which is basically word of mouth. Somebody told you that your great-grandfather came from here. Historical documents, and those documents include a lot of different things. Griffith's evaluation from the mid-1800s, the 1824 Tithe Appointment Book, the Flax Growers Book of 1796, church records, and many, many other documents, the Annals of Ulster, for example. All of those could represent historical documents that might be interesting and have meaning for you and your family. And then the third thing is DNA. So family histories, historical documents, and DNA. And much like the idea of longitude, latitude, and altitude that can help you to actually locate the exact position of an airplane, this many degrees north, this many degrees west, and 50,000 feet, These three tools can actually combine to help you triangulate on ancestors much more strongly than any one tool alone. I'd like to tell you a little story about how that worked for me and maybe how it might work for you as well. So, as I said, when I was young, I heard that we were Miles trainers, and I even heard about a guy named Thomas from Eshnaglaw sometime in the early to mid 1800s. But I really didn't know very much. I did see a copy of Griffith's valuation, which showed that Thomas was living at Eshnaglaw, and it shows how many acres he had and how much he paid. But I didn't know very much about where Thomas came from and where he came from before he lived at Eshnaglaw. And as to this name Miles, I had no idea who that meant and who it might be. So I thought that that was an interesting thing to search for, maybe by using these combinations of different tools. And my Y-DNA test that I took, and later that Seamus Miles of Emmyvale took, confirmed that we were closely related to Seamus Miles of Emmyvale and to his nephews, Joe and Enda Fields. And we got to know each other over the internet in the Facebook group, which was a great pleasure. And the Fields brothers, for which I'm very grateful, shared a copy of their ancestor, Brother Melman's Trainer genealogy, which traced their family back to a man named William Trainer who lived at Dava Otra in the 1820s. And that was a fascinating find. And it was interesting to me for a couple of reasons. One was that while my aunt, who was a nun of the Sacred Heart, was working on our genealogy, their uncle, Brother Melman, was working on genealogy from their side. So a wonderful contribution of those two people to helping us to understand our families better. But that Dava Otra hint that they gave me allowed me to look back to the year 1824 in a source that's on the internet now called the Tithe Appointment Book. And after a difficult search, and if you want to find out why it was difficult, I invite you to read the upcoming article. Um, the book showed three men, William, Thomas, and Pat Traynor, spelled Trenor, farming small adjacent plots next to each other at Dava Otra in the year 1824, which is actually before Thomas went to Eshnaglaw. And this was a eureka moment because to me, the idea that three men with the same last name were farming small plots adjacent to each other suggested to me that in those days, in the penal laws, that land had been divided between the three brothers, which was a rule of the penal laws of the British that if you did not convert to the Church of Ireland, uh, you had to divide your land equally between your sons. And here we have three packets of land immediately adjacent to each other at Dava Otra being farmed by these three men, William, Thomas, and Pat Traynor. And that Thomas, I'm convinced, was the Thomas who then a few years later went to lease land up in the hills of Eshnaglaw and probably turned over some of his land to his brothers. So that was a fascinating eureka moment for me to say, hey, this combination of genetic information and family history together with public records has actually helped me to find the connection between Miles Trainer's family and my family in Ireland. So the question remained, who was this guy Miles? We've got my ancestors and we've got uh, Seamus Miles' ancestors, but none of them are named Miles. There was a Miles in my family, but a couple generations later. So who was this ancestor that we're all descended to called Miles? Well, one more source I was able to drill into, which was the Flax Growers List of 1796. And if you look at that list, it shows the all the flax growers who registered, as well as the parish that they lived in. And in the year 1796, there is only one Miles Trainer, spelled Myles, which is how we've always been told it was spelled. And when you look through the records and you find him, you find that he was located in Trough, which, by the way, I think is where Dava Otra is located. And I can't guarantee that Miles, who was growing flax in Trough in 1796, is the Miles, but the evidence to me is pretty compelling that he was the Miles who farmed flax at Dava Otra in the 1790s, and that Thomas and William and Pat were his sons, and they were born there, and they divided the land upon his death. And then later, I was actually able to confirm that this Thomas of mine was probably born in 1783 based on his death registration in 1879 when he died at the age of 96. And so he would have been living with his father, Miles, probably in Dava Otra at that point. And so this guy then is the Eureka moment. He's the ancestor of the Miles clan living in Trough in the 1780s and 1790s, and the person who started the clan that today we call the Miles clan. Now, this is interesting to me, not just because it relates to me, because it was a wonderful example of how, if I lacked one of those three sources of information, the historical records, the family history, and the genetics, I wouldn't have found the path to this result, that I had to use all of them together and actually to find it. And by using those together, we actually wind up seeing the combined result. So that's the end of the presentation for today. I'm going to turn this over to you for a moment for questions and maybe for open discussion if we'd like. But I invite you all, if you have not yet, to please go to the web and visit the Trainor.org website. And if you're interested in this story of the Trainor genealogy and Trainor ancestry, both for the Hymeny and for the O'Neills, to go to the page within that website called Trainor-DNA. And I also invite you to stay tuned for the next session that we'll do, as Seamus mentioned, and the upcoming release of the Trainor book, which will have more information that we hope you will all find interesting and enjoyable. With that, I'm going to stop and turn things over to Seamus, and maybe Seamus, if there are any more questions.
There was a good comment there, John. You mentioned the appointments book. It is in fact the allotments book.
Okay, thank you.
Somebody on the system has put a link to it. There's a few others. Let's just see if we've got anything else. Just go to there. Have anyone? So there's somebody asking about connections with Tyrone, and we can follow that through. We will make this available on the Trainer site. We've got as a question: what can we as a group hope to do to fill in some of the holes in our DNA research? Do you want to explain that how we're sponsoring some people, John?
Yes.
In more interesting places.
Well, yeah, I'm going to be frank with you and recognize that for a trainer, for example, in the United States or perhaps Australia, who have lost our connection to the Trainer family in Ireland, we may be more anxious or more interested in trying to find out where our roots are. I think for many in Ireland, if you live on the land where your ancestors lived and you know that you were there for 200 years, you may not be quite as urgently interested in finding out where you came from. And so it may be a little different if for example, your family has always lived in the same part of Ireland than if you are American and you don't know your ancestry. And recognizing that to be true, we set up the YDNA initiative in a couple of ways. First, we encourage all trainers who are interested in participating to take a test, because we think any contribution you make, whether it's in the recorded history, your family history that you can tell us about, or in terms of your historical DNA and your ancestry, is an asset and valuable to the project. But we also really appreciate the assistance and the participation of our cousins in Ireland who can actually help us to understand more about our family history. And for that reason, we've established a fund, and we contribute to the fund. And we've had a lot of contributors. I sponsored a test. A lot of us have. I see Bill and Ted and other people online who've sponsored tests. And we've sponsored tests to incent people to join the initiative, and particularly for the Irishmen who can tell us a little bit more about family history and what they know of their family nicknames or their family townlands, which allows then people like me who might not know the answer to actually genetically connect to the Seamus Miles, for example, and the Fields brothers, who can help me to learn more. And by sharing that, we can actually all get wiser. And so I'm strongly an advocate of asking everyone who can and who is interested in testing to test, and that if you have tested, your contributions to the Trainer initiative are always welcome. If you want to make a contribution, that information is in the trainer.org website, and we can give you guidance on how to do that. And if you're a trainer in Ireland who can tell us something about your family and something about your history, we can try to make the test less expensive for you in recognition of the value and the unique contribution that your family can make into the project by telling us about your history. And whether your family comes from Carrick or RD or Connaught, every trainer brings a unique piece of the puzzle into learning about our family history. And we're very anxious to have you join us.
John, thank you. We've got a couple of queries which I've suggested people can take offline, but one of them is a very technical one, and the other is about people asking for help with the YDNA test. But I'll link them to you outside of here, if that's okay.
Great. And by the way, I will continue to post my email address on the trainer.org DNA page. If you have questions or you need assistance or there's anything that you'd like to do, please feel free to reach out to me. Verbally, I'll just tell you it's JJP, like John Joseph Patrick, Trainer with a Y, @gmail.com. But I'll also make sure that I put that out and put it on the trainer.org website and invite you to email me with any questions you have. By the way, I've also got a copy of the chat window, so I'll go through the chat window later and try to see if I can put more information out there with that information.
Yeah, okay, that's brilliant. We've got some more comments, most of them praising your presentation, John, which was pretty incredible to keep talking and making sense at all that. Yeah, that's fabulous. We just had a comment which is true. We'll lead on to something else, that the O'Neills and the O'Main could be related to the female line, given that ancient Ireland was not as patriarchal as maybe it has been since the 1100s or so. Right, so I'll just open up and everybody can give I know I closed you all down, so I've muted you all, and now if I can work out how to unmute you, then we can, right, you should all be able to unmute yourselves now, and I think we can give John a round of applause if that's okay.
Thank you.
That's excellent. That's excellent, John. Thank you very much. Right,
Not at all.
As John said, have we got anybody who wants to say anything else?
Yes, about the last name, Trainer. Why do the two branches have the same name? Is that just by chance?
Well, it's a good question. I don't think we know, but what I think we can say is that the word trainer, which means strong man, isn't uniquely Irish, by which I mean in England, a strong man might have been named Strong, or it might have been named Armstrong. It just so happens that an ancestor of ours who was strong wound up being named Strongman, and his son was called McCreanor or O-Trainer. It's possible that the name originated separately and distinctly in two different parts of Ireland, one with an O'Neill family and one with a Hymany family. And we don't know that for sure, but we think that's probably what had happened. It's always possible that we have a common ancestor in a different way. And for example, if way back in history, someone was adopted or brought into a family and reared in the family, they would still share the same name. Personally, from what I'm seeing in our history, it looks to me like that might not be the case, that this might actually be spontaneous emergence of the name strong man in one clan, the strong man of the O'Neills and the strong man of the Hymany, two different men who just happen to get the same name.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Other more work to be done there. Okay, right. Thank you, John. Thank you again. Our next session is in a month's time, Sunday the 21st, where we have the launch of the book project with some readings from people there, and then the one after that is an online Ceilidh just after St Patrick's Day, and that's on March the 21st. I think they're on the same time. That by all means, keep an eye out on Facebook and join into the Trainer website. Can I just say, everybody, it was a pleasure listening to John, and I think we can all be, we all left here knowing a lot more than we knew before.
Absolutely. Welcome. John.
Wonderful seeing everyone.
Agreed.
Thank you.
Okay. I'll leave it up. If I've unmuted everybody, and I think I've allowed you to go to videos. So if you want to catch up with some of the people or see we've had 47 people on this.
Oh, great.
It was 48 at the height. Somebody,
Right.
you obviously bored one person, John. Got it.
I've been known to do it in the past.
So that was brilliant. I'd love to. It would be great to see more people involved in the DNA project.
While we're here, can I just thank Michael Trainer? He's on there. Michael's done most of the work on the website, and it's a great resource for us. And I suggest people would use it as often as they can. It's very, very handy. And if you've got something you want to put up on it, by all means, go to the website. In addition, as Seamus was saying, that the book project volume 2 is being presented next month, but we're going to be working on volume 3. So if anybody has any sort of stories, anything about their family, anything of interest, the first volume is on the website and you can access it there. Much of it is about people chasing their genetics and their connections. The second volume, as it's coming out, is focusing on people with a certain amount of migration and on close relatives who've been kind of significant in ordinary and extraordinary ways to people. So if you've got anything along those lines, or even just want to interview somebody, anything along, by all means, contact us. If you don't know how to contact us, you're on the wrong website.
Hey, this is Bill Trainer in New York. Hey, Seamus, thank you for doing this too. We really appreciate it.
That's all right, Bill. That was a pleasure.
Yep.
Okay.
And I just saw a question from Gerard about how to get access. Gerard, if you're still on board, I will message you and give you instructions, but I just pasted a link to the trainer.org website, and I will follow through and send you a link and correspond with you privately about how to get access. I do not see Gerard. Oh no, Gerard's there. Gerard, I'll talk to you a little bit more later on.
Just paper
Good
interacting
to
with
see
them.
my Irish relatives.
Oh, John, I do have a question. So I did do the Y-DNA test, and I found out that I have a Kelly that is very, very closely related to me, and in fact, it's another null. So, should we be pursuing the Kellys and other names that you had mentioned as possible DNA informants?
Yes, I think, first of all, let me say we do have a contact within the Kelly clan whose name is Aidan Kelly. And Aidan is managing the DNA initiative for the Kellys in the same way that we're doing this project within the Trainors. And Aidan is a smart guy and has been doing this for a while. And they're very interested in the Hymeny ancestry because they actually have this royal lineage that actually has a count of the Holy Roman Emperor in their lineage of the Kellys of Connaught. So they're very interested in that stuff. But the only thing that I would give you a caveat on is that when you look at the Y111 or the Y37 or the Y111 tests, it's possible that you may see a Kelly show up as a match in those tests who doesn't show up as a match when you do the big Y. And the reason for that is that it's kind of like playing liar's poker. If you have a dollar bill and I have a dollar bill and every dollar bill has a serial number on it, and I read a couple numbers, they might match the numbers that you've got. But if you read all the numbers that you've got on your dollar bill and I read all the numbers that I've got on mine, then you know that it's not a match. So every one of us, pardon me, in a very basic Y-DNA test, like a Y37, will show a Kelly who matches us. But it may not be a close connection, given the fact that we know we separated from the Kellys at least 1,000 years ago. We don't know for sure how far. So what I would encourage you to do is check to see if you have that connection to that Kelly in your big Y matches. And if you do, then there's something interesting there, and I would certainly pursue it. Because it might be a family relationship thing. But I know, for example, that when I look at my tests on a kind of a Y37 level, I wind up with a couple of Kelly matches that disappear when I go to a better test or a deeper test. I hope that's clear.
Yes, it is very clear, and this was a Y111 test, and I don't think he did a Y700 test, and so the clues end there, I guess.
Well, you know, I think that's one of the things. If you want to take that offline, I'd be glad to work with you on it. Maybe we could try to hunt him down and see what the connection is. But you may wind up with some Kelly matches because we are related to the Kellys. But this is why we encourage people to do the 700, because when you take a Y111, you might look like a connection, but then you take a big Y700 and it turns out that the connection is 1,000 years old.
Good. Thanks. I'll get in touch with you.
Okay.
Marty, thanks so much for the presentation. But I had a comment about Aidan. When I talked to him a while ago, he said that he estimated that we are 40th cousins. So that tells you how far apart we probably are for the Kellys.
Now, there's kind of an interesting question that's emerging. Okay, let me talk to that for one moment. Aidan and I are having a conversation right now about that very topic. And the reason is because we recently found this document, which we don't know whether to believe or not. And that document traces our family relationship into the Hymeny Kellys. And this is for the Hymeny side, not the O'Neills. Traces our relationship back to the Hymeny to this Tag Moore O'Kelly in about the year 1000. Now, that's a more recent connection than we had thought before. We used to think that it was 500 AD. So I sent that to Aidan Kelly and I said, hey, what do you think about this? And he said, oh, I don't believe it. because it should be 80 years or more in every mutation, and that would be back around the year 500. But there's an interesting thing about this document that I showed you earlier, which is the Irish handwritten document, and that is that whoever wrote this knew that we were related to the Hymeni, to the Kellys of Connaught, because it traces our ancestry back to a king of the Hymeni. Well, if it was 1,000 years or more, how would he have known that? It probably would have been very difficult for someone to know. So we're wrestling with this and trying to figure out, when did our family really branch? Did we branch at the year 1000, around the time of Teg Morrell Kelly, or did we branch away in the year 500? And this is something that Aidan and I are wrestling. So I wouldn't say that 40 generations number is gospel. Aidan and I are still trying to thrash this out, and that might actually be the next topic that we come back to you in 6 months or a year with a presentation about. Okay.
Yeah. All right. I think we'll look forward to that, John. Yeah, answering some of the more awkward questions about the trainers.
Great.
Okay. I think have we got any more questions there for John? No. Right. I think that was a fabulous presentation, John. We'll save it and make it available to people on the website. And there was some lovely to see you all, and we'll catch you all in a month's time. All right, share that with everybody. Take care.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.
Thanks very much. Thanks,
Wonderful
everybody.
day.
Bye-bye.
Fabulous.
Happy
Bye-bye.
weekend.
Bye.
Hola. Bye-bye, hola.
Bye.